I make a motion we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Motion passes. Tonight's meeting is about the Zebulon National Registry Historic District. Mike Clark will present as follow up to the joint public meeting and Wake County Historic Preservation Commission meeting and recommendations.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Tonight is a follow-up from last Monday's joint public hearing. As you recall, we provided information regarding the proposed nomination. Tonight's going to be a brief summary of that and items that have, or actions that have occurred since we were all last together. To kind of recap where we've come from, this process originally started in 2017 when Wake County Historic Preservation and the town of Zebulon rejoined the interlocal agreement. There was a survey that was done in 2018, and then in February 2019, the State Historic Preservation Office provided a presentation to the Board of Commissioners at their annual retreat. During that presentation, they outlined the concept, the timelines, as well as the intent and purpose of these districts. And at that time, it indicated that they wanted to be a partner with the town in the process. We also went through the listing process and provided details on the tax credit program. Preservation Zebulon also came into the picture at this point in time. It's an independent 501c3 that really took preservation on as an interest to provide information, documentation, and resources to the citizens. They also started the process to create a National Historic District based on the survey that was created in 2018. In February 11th, 2021, the National Register Advisory Committee tabled the application for this based on the town's request. It noted that the town was not part of the process. There was concerns due to COVID, as well as not adequately providing appropriate public input. They concurred with our concerns and tabled it. So on May 6th, the town held a public hearing, which was at the community center, was very well attended, both virtually as well as in person. The town highlighted the concerns, and several members of the public got up to speak both in favor and with concerns of the proposed request as currently submitted. Then on June 7th, 2021, the board and Wake County Historic Preservation Commission took those concerns into consideration, as well as the criteria for the listing and recommended denial. Then on June 10th, 2021, the National Register Advisory Committee unanimously recommended approval to the National Park Service. They are the entity that oversees historic districts within the United States. The town then petitioned the keeper last August, noting concerns with the proposed nomination, both procedural as well as technical concerns. And then on September 17th, 2021, the petition was granted, and in November, we received notice of resubmittal, which meant that the keeper sent it back to the State Historic Preservation Office, noting procedural concerns, and then noted that we had to go through the proper process, specifically that the town was a certified local government, and that we were working with Wake County, and that both the town and Wake County did have a say in the process. So that kind of brings us up to where we're at in terms of what this is. As previously noted, the period of significance is the time period in which the resources or the structure, buildings, are constructed or events happened. This could include events, activities, persons, such as famous people who may have stayed there, presidents staying in locations tend to be item, as well as when they attain their characteristics. Frequently, this is when a building was constructed or when significant modifications were made that were representative of a period of history. Typically, these also begin with the date of construction or when that historic significance occurred, such as the activities or events. It doesn't necessarily have to be specific to the architectural style, though. And we're going to get more into that in a little bit later in the presentation. Additional guidelines which are taken into consideration. The property must possess the historic integrity for all the periods of significance, not just one. And then the period of significance is based on when those properties really made the contributions to the community and or achieve the character in which the significance is based. Finally, at least 50 years old. The criteria for the National Register is broken into 4 options. You don't need to meet all 4 options, but the more options that you meet, the more credibility it gives to that particular district. It's worth noting that districts are not necessarily just architectural based. They can be associated with events that made a significant contribution. These could be riots or strikes or famous events like creation of products. I think of particular the assembly line where Henry Ford first set up. That is a historic site in and of itself because of the activities that occurred there, not because of the architectural significance. Associated with significant persons. This could be the birthplace of presidents, governors, or other elected officials, dignitaries, those type of locations. Criteria C is the architectural criteria. This is one where does the architectural style and characteristics on the building, is that representative of a particular time in history? And then finally, that there's some other category, some other event, activity, situation that would provide important information to either prehistory or history. These could be archaeology sites. So this is the draft that is currently before you tonight. It does contain a period of significance from 1906 to 1971, which is a fairly large span. It covers 239 primary resources. But is it representative of how the town developed? As you may recall, originally Wakefield Village predates the town of Zebulon. It was established in 1826. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Raleigh-Pamlico Railroad wanted to build a railroad through this area. The citizens stood up and said, no, tell you what, why don't you go about a mile down the road, it's an undeveloped area, and that's what we know as Zebulon today, specifically downtown Zebulon. It was started because of the railroad. And this is the original layout for the town. As you can see, grab the pointer here, Glen Street, which at that time was called Wakelon Street, was the northernmost boundaries, and then Barbie Street and then Oak Street and Poplar to the south. This is Arundel, and it's kind of split over to 2 maps. Sorry, catching my bottle. And Gannon and Vance Street. Originally, Vance was intended to be the main street of the town as opposed to Arundel. And then Barbie was the other side, but it was split here by the railroad tracks. Now, this is significant because this is what the original town of Zebulon looked like. Railroad's right there. And this is what that area looks like today, overlaid onto a modern current parcel map. So you can see it's a fairly significant portion of our downtown as well as the nearby neighborhoods. As development occurred, they started making the connections. One of those connections was called Wakelon, which was combining Wakefield as well as Zebulon. And that was primarily the blocks that fronted on Arundel, being that was already an established path. And this is what that looked like from 1907. This is the school that we're in today. As development continued, the Wakelon Plat was established. Then they started going outward, but that didn't occur until 1950. There was a couple lots that were developed, but actual structured development patterns that are representative and characteristic of what these type of districts would look for didn't start occurring until 1950 when Wakelon Heights extended to the west of Arundel. And this is the Wakelon Heights plat. You'll note that it incorporates some of the original Wakelon plat, but this dark line here, it's hard to see on the screen, but it's labeled town boundaries, which meant that with the exception of a few scattered homes in here, this area wasn't platted, wasn't really developed. Eventually, that's what it looked like based on our modern layouts. And that's what the town limits looked like in 1950 when this was created. As development continued, it started making some of the changes to the original Wakelon plat, and the amendment was approved in 1954, which incorporated both sides of Arundel, consuming the original Wakelon plat. And you can see Arundel in the middle, Glen at the bottom where the original northern boundary of the town was, and then Judd Street to the top. And that's what Wakelon Heights looked like in 1954. That area was the area that was incorporated, essentially consuming the full portion of Wakelon plat from 1907. As development continued, the Wakelon Heights expanded into several additions from 1954 to 1973. These areas really kind of changed the shape of that area. That's why there's bends in the roads and everything else, because these plats took into consideration those modifications. And more so is the architectural style within these additions is consistent with a lot of what you see over here, even knowing that these areas were not included in the proposed nomination. So let's break this down into timelines of when things occurred. Original Zebulon plat was 1905 or 1906, followed quickly by the Wakelon plat. And then it wasn't until 1950 that Wakelon Heights was platted. Shortly after that, Wakelon Heights was amended to completely encapsulate the Wakelon plat. Then the extensions followed up to 1973. But it's important to look at what's in this gap. We have World War I, which really changed the way that Americans lived their lives. Then World War II, which took it a step further. We also had the Great Depression that kind of really changed the way social dynamics occurred within communities. And Henry Ford's assembly line was also in there. This is significant because this really changed how we got around. No longer were lots being developed with a pedestrian orientation to really focus on either horse and carriage or pedestrians connected. You had different density patterns, different architectural styles. Suddenly you had homes with driveways in the front versus alleyways. It really changed how we interacted with our built environment. It's also representative of the differences between the original core of the downtown and the nearby neighborhoods, as well as the Wakelon Heights. Majority of those are suburban style residential homes, typically one-story mid-century modern architecture, where the majority of the homes within the original were either AAAs or small cottages. Some of them were Victorians, and we have a wide range of Victorian and Italianate architectural styles within the downtown business core as well. And the age map even represents this based on when these different developments occurred. This is just a breakdown of houses that were constructed between 1833 to or buildings between 1833 to 1850, and then constructed after 1850 to 1870. And then the ones in gray were outside of the 50-year time frame when this was created. Furthermore, our current land development patterns, as we have established through our Code of Ordinances, as our Unified Development Ordinance, our Comprehensive Land Use Plan, all these really look at these different characteristics. The area shaded in yellow, with the exception of the properties on Gannon Street, are really representative of your more suburban style residential development, whereas the green areas primarily in the center and the core. These are areas that we're looking for reinvestment in, where it's a different land use pattern, more representative of what you'd find in a more dense urban environment. Not so much growing up in size, but incorporating more of a pedestrian scale. Finally, or next, let's talk about the architectural differences. As we've discussed multiple times, 214 East Horton Street, wonderful home. I don't think there's any question that this is characteristic of the original incorporated area of Zebulon. Then on the flip side, we have 911 North Church Street, mid-century modern that has a carport that blocks the majority of the structure, limits visibility of the structure, has several aftermarket features, including the solar panels on the front of the structure. It's a different connotation, different lifestyle, different characteristic from the house on the left. However, both of these are listed as contributing resources within the same district. It also lists the Zebulon Swim Association pool as well as pool building independently as contributing resources to the structure. Not only do these not contain any architectural significance, they've been neglected for so long, they're past the point of appropriate repair. Sure, with enough money, anything is possible. But this is significant because the Zebulon Swim Association pool is currently owned by a defunct 501c3, which means that there is nobody maintaining it. The taxes aren't getting paid, and it's become a perpetual code enforcement issue for the town. There's questions of safety in or around the pool. Sure, it has a chain link fence with barbed wire, I believe, in one section, and a padlock on the gate inside. But there's been multiple times that I've been out there that lock hasn't been fully secured, which is how I got the picture on the right. If this were to be obtained by another 501c3 that wanted to use a federal grant or some other federal program, under the interpretation of the National Preservation Act, they would not be able to utilize federal funds in a way that would negatively impact a contributing historical resource within the district. Let's talk about these for a moment. These are two AAAs that are located on Barbie Street. It's evident that one has undergone restoration and the other one has not. However, form, function, size, massing, these are both in fairly good conditions, being original structures. And one of the concerns that was represented was that it was on the south side of the railroad tracks, and there wasn't enough architectural integrity for them to be even considered. I'm going to show you a video that was done by some folks from the National Park Service as well as other state agencies regarding this particular topic. Not only is this significant because it addresses this particular situation, but it also is significant because James Gabbert, one of the panelists, actually works for the keeper of the National Park Service. These are the things that they take into consideration when reviewing these districts.
All right, Greg, thank you very much. Lena, you may want to unmute. We've got a few minutes left, and I've been frantically typing away at the Q&As as best as I can, but I did leave some of them to answer from us. So I'm just going to work my way down. We may not be able to get to all of them in the next few minutes, but I'm going to try. From Caitlin, how has the NPS and SHPO addressed how integrity is is an explanation of why the building or the district or whatever the resource is still retains sufficient integrity to reflect its significance. So we don't have a hard and fast rule that says it must have this, it must have that. What we're asking for is a reasoned explanation for why it has sufficient integrity. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Sure. I would like to add that I feel that there often can be unintended class bias in how properties are evaluated for eligibility in terms of their integrity. Properties may not ever have had great workmanship or great design and materials. And it doesn't matter because that's not what makes the property significant. It's significant for an association with an event or a person, or a type, a resource type. Great example being shotgun houses in some states. And I always caution people not to say that a property doesn't have integrity just because it doesn't have fine quality materials. And I also think it's important to take into account the context of the alterations that may have been undertaken. For sometimes the installation of aluminum siding, for instance, was a huge improvement for a building. And it should not be, for the property owner, it was a big deal to have it installed. And so preservationists, I think, are incorrect to come back and say, oh, well, it's been altered and it doesn't have integrity. I think that's too limited of a view. So I wrote this in one of the Q&A questions. An example here in Virginia that is always at our forefront is African American churches. From Reconstruction up through the mid-20th century, most of those churches were frame construction, especially in rural areas. And often, as soon as they had the resources, the congregation would put a brick veneer on those buildings because to them that was symbolic of what they wanted to convey about their property and their congregation. And so, we would not say that a building that got a brick veneer in 1970 lost its integrity because the motivation for that alteration is part of the property's significance, its association with a congregation that maybe has endured since 1870 and Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights Movement and things like that. And by 1970, in their context, in addition to all those historic periods, they also had changing financial circumstances and were able to get a brick veneer fine. So I would strongly advise anybody who's worried about integrity on properties to make sure that they're not looking at it through a class-based lens.
And that's partly one of the concerns that the staff has is there was parts of the town that were not included as part of the survey and not taken into consideration in their full context beyond just the architectural integrity of these particular structures. As I noted before, one of these structures has been renovated and the other one is awaiting renovation. It's areas like this that the tax credit program, if applied, could have the greatest benefit on the town. As noted in other parts, this was the original survey boundaries. You can see it did extend quite a bit out from the original or from what's proposed. It did include portions of the Wakelon Heights that met the 50-year requirement, but it did not take into consideration Barbie Street. Additionally, when you zoom in, you can see that it stopped at the railroad tracks. It took in consideration the railroad tracks. At least it acknowledged the foundational history of the town. But that story includes the residents and the structures that were along Barbie Street. The other component is the Zebulon Supply Company, which is located right here on this map. This is what that building used to look like. Today, we know it as Whitley Galleries. As previously noted, it's unfortunately that business is no longer going to be with us in the near future. However, it is open, or does open up the opportunities for redevelopment. The State Historic Preservation Office indicates that it does not retain its architectural integrity. However, when you look at a side-by-side comparison, the modifications that were done to this building could easily be reversed. Additionally, the State Historic Preservation Office has even done webinars as part of a series on historic preservation, showing examples within North Carolina where non-contributing buildings that were in a district made the necessary modifications to be reclassified as contributing resources, and then took the renovations further by utilizing those tax credits. Additionally, it showed how it could be applied for mixed use projects where residential was on the second floor and commercial was on the first floor. This building was included as part of the original survey, but was somehow taken out throughout the process. During the joint public hearing, it was noted that there's a lot of other districts that have a similar time span ranging from within their period of significance. However, in those other situations, that time span still contained a cohesive architectural style. The character of the buildings, the architectural and development patterns were consistent throughout that time period. In the situation that's before you tonight, that is unfortunately not the case. One of the things that Sarah Woodard mentioned in her presentation was there could be examples if the period of significance extends into too many architectural frames, where you might have a building in your downtown that was constructed in the early 1800s that had aftermarket T111 aluminum siding applied, kind of like this building. But because of when that application was made onto that building or skinned onto that building, that modification in and of itself could be considered a contributing resource. And by the definition of how the tax credit structure is set up, you can't use tax credits for things that are going to negatively impact the contributing resources to the building. So something like this, in a district that had the architectural style extended too far, would not be able to be renovated to look like that. This is a building in our neighboring community of Wendell. That's what it looked like before on the left, and that's what it looks like on the right. The renovations to the left were done in the 60s, which is part of the period of significance as proposed within our district. And you might be saying, we don't have those type of buildings in our town. Well, in terms of T111 aluminum siding, that's correct. But we do have several other buildings that were modified during that time period, such as bricking over the entire first floor to have more of a residential style appearance with a commercial solid state awning, while still retaining the architectural style and details on the second floor. Or maybe this one. Or maybe this one, where the windows were, the bottoms of the windows were boarded up and aftermarket aluminum storefronts were put in. The planning board took this up for consideration after the joint public hearing and all the information was provided. After quite a bit of discussion, the planning board voted 5-2 to recommend denial, finding that the proposed request was inconsistent with the town's land development policies as currently proposed. They did note, however, that they would encourage the town to partner with other folks and hire a consultant that would really take a look at a revised survey that could possibly bring in some of these original components of the incorporated town, the town, to truly tell the story of Zebulon. And possibly even two separate districts. They could still be that the Wakelon Heights area becomes one district, and then the downtown becomes another district, each with their own independent period of significance to prevent situations like highlighted previously. The Wake County Historic Preservation Commission also took action, and they voted 7-0 to recommend denial of the district, finding that it did not meet the criteria established for a National Register district. I was not at that meeting. We do have Gary Roth and Jeremy Bradham from Capitol Area Preservation, who are the staff officials for that group. And if you do have any questions regarding their action or the discussion at that meeting, they'll be able to provide details. Ultimately, staff recommends denial of the proposed nomination and adoption of Resolution 2022-10. It's worth noting that staff is not opposed to a historic district, quite the opposite. We want a National Historic District, but we want it to be done correctly. We recommend our denial based on it's inconsistent with the town's land use policies, does not meet the criteria for the National Register Historic District, and that the survey and the process that they went through to establish the district were flawed. Staff does recommend approval of a budget amendment, ordinance 2022-32, which would allow us to partner with other organizations to put out an RFP to hire a consultant to revise and review the existing survey and possibly even submit for one or more National Register Historic Districts. And I am available if you have any questions.
Questions from the board?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to hear from Jeremy and those guys, if I could, please.
Either one of us?
Either, be fine.
Oh, yes. I keep forgetting we now have the two podiums set up.
Yes, sir. What can I answer any questions for you? Or?
I think you had insight on the 7-0 vote. I mean, the outlook on
Yes.
it. I would like to hear that perspective.
So we gave a official report. I don't know, Mike, is that in their packet that they had for the 3 points that we gave the reasonings? Using A and C as the justification, the commission came to the conclusion that it did not meet A or C and gave 3 bullet points, and I can pull that up for you.
I believe the staff report will end.
Part of the resolution,
Okay.
if you look at, I think it's the fourth page of the resolution, you should be able to look at their supporting documentation.
You have it right there. Thank you. Yep, I was trying to pull it back up on that. So the 3 points that we presented in our staff report to the Wake County Historic Preservation Commission were, 1, the district as currently proposed includes 1960s and 70s neighborhoods that have no relationship to the core story of Zebulon as an early 20th century railroad, tobacco, and textile town, while at the same time excluding African-American neighborhoods that do have a relationship to that core story. 2, the areas north of North Street do not share that same distinctive characteristics of the same type, period, or method of construction as areas south of North Street in the older section of the proposed district. There's a diverse collection of early 20th century architectural styles in the areas south of North Street, whereas the areas north of North Street contain mostly ranch-style houses, which are minimally represented south of North Street. And 3, the district as proposed does not represent a significant and distinguishable entity, whether its components lack individual distinction or not. So the reasoning for the staff report that the commission agreed were based on criterion A and C, basically saying that no, it did not meet those based on those 3 points.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board? Comments? Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2022-10?
So moved.
We have a second? All in favor?
I'll second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The motion passes. Next, the ordinance 2022-32. We need to discuss if we want to approve the funding and hiring a consultant to review the current study list provided for recommendations.
I have a question on exactly how you derive the $20,000 when most of the survey's already been done.
There's elements of the survey that were incomplete, such as the review of Barbie Street. Additionally, part of this process would be to explore who our community partners are with this, and then put out an RFQ, and really kind of pick up the ball from where it is now to move forward so we could get a National Historic District. That particular figure was based on conversations with Capital Area Preservation on what we'd cost.
I make a motion we adopt ordinance 2022-32.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. There are no other business.
Do we have any type of an expected timeline for this to proceed and be completed?
Well, realistically, it's probably going to take 2 to 3 months before we prepare the RFQ, explore who our community partners are with this, and be able to come back before you once we have a selected consultant.
I think is there some question about some grants also?
That's part of what we're going to explore in terms of our community partners, is what other funding opportunities would be available as well.
Any other questions, comments? There are no other business before the board. This motion is a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
1 second before we adjourn. I think it's important for me. I didn't speak up earlier for when we adopted 2022-10. I think it's important that I see the carpenters are here tonight. I want to definitely explain that I feel that I've done the due diligence as much as I can to make sure that the work that you guys have done doesn't go unnoticed. And I take it wholeheartedly. I've done my due diligence. That's speaking with all the representatives that I could in the community to get their input. And it's just the insight for me to ensure that you guys know that it is much appreciative of what you've done thus far. And I look forward to working with you guys to ensure that we pursue what you guys have already started with the town. And I assure you guys that. And I just want that to be made known. And I thank you guys.
I'd also like to comment that it just appears that no fault of Zebulon preservation, but the process itself is not all inclusive as far as African American communities, and maybe at some point that could be looked at and reviewed and on another level to make sure that all neighborhoods are inclusive, or at least have some indication of their historical content. Thank you for the work that you've done. Any other comments, questions? Do we have a second for the adjourn?
I second.
Second? All in favor? Meeting adjourned.